Carly Fiorina was the Hewlett-Packard CEO. She just recently announced that she will be running for president of the United States, which is kind of a big deal. Please welcome her to stage. We're super honored to have her, as well as Sarah Lane. Go.
Thanks. Hi.
Welcome, Carly.
Thank you. Great to have me.
It's very exciting, not only because it's the first time that I've ever interviewed anybody who wants to be president and is actually running, but the first time that we've ever had somebody who wants to be president at TechCrunch Disrupt. So this is quite an honor.
Well,
thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here. And gee, you know, technology is a disruptive force, so maybe we should use it to disrupt the status quo of government and re-engage citizens in the process of their government.
I guess my first question is the most obvious one, but I'm sure it's a complicated answer. Why do you want to be president of the United States of America?
Well, because I think our nation is at a really pivotal point. This is a place now where too many people fear that we are losing the sense of limitless possibility that has always defined this nation. And when we lose a sense of possibility for our nation, for our lives, for our children's and grandchildren's lives, for our communities, we're losing the core of who we are. And you see that fear in too many lives tangled up in webs of dependence, or people who have no stake in their communities because they don't think there's a future for them there, or the fact that we're destroying more businesses than we're creating for the first time in US history, or the fact that our government has become so huge, so bureaucratic, so bloated, so unaccountable, that citizens feel this gulf between them and the government that is supposedly there to serve them and for which they are paying.
So yesterday, we ran a story on TechCrunch, you might have seen it, that was titled, "Carly Fiorina hopes her experience as CEO of HP will help win over voters." Is that accurate?
Well, certainly that's one of the experiences that I would bring to the table. I started out as a secretary, so first of all, it's only in this country you can go from a secretary of a 9-person real estate firm to the chief executive of the largest technology company in the world. And that experience certainly gives me an in-depth understanding of how the economy works. But I've chaired major charities in this country as well. I know most of the world leaders on the stage today. I understand how the world works and who's in it. I do understand bureaucracies. That's important because our government is one big, giant bureaucracy. I understand technology, and technology is a tool that can be used, as I said, to reimagine government and to re-engage a whole set of people who in this country feel disconnected from the political process in very serious ways. And finally, I think the Oval Office is, among other things, about making executive decisions, which are tough calls in tough times, with high stakes for which you're prepared to be held accountable. And I don't think you learn that by reading about it. I think you learn it by doing it.
What have you learned from running a huge technology company that you'll apply to the post?
Well, first, you know, bureaucracies, and I started out my business career once I left the secretarial pool in AT&T. It was a big bureaucracy at the time, the Bell system. When I arrived at Hewlett-Packard, it was known as the gray lady of Silicon Valley. It was growing at 2% in the middle of the biggest technology upturn in history. It was a big bureaucracy, and there's certain things you have to do to move bureaucracies. One, you have to know where your money is being spent. So we don't have any idea how our government spends money. We don't ever look at a budget top to bottom. We need to actually go to zero-based budgeting so we can prioritize how money is spent. Secondly, of course, I know that in a bureaucracy you need to actually move from what is today a seniority system. You know, you get paid based on how long you've been in a job. That's true in most bureaucracies, to a pay for performance system, so that you're paying on merit and contribution, and you're not paying people who aren't doing their job. And finally, of course, technology is a tool that can help with all of that. It's amazing to me, here we are in 2015, a time of unbelievable technology innovation, a time when it's actually easy for any person anywhere to get any piece of information they want at any time, or to communicate with anyone else they want at any time, and yet we really have no idea what's going on in our government. Zero. And so I think we need to reimagine government and the process of government with modern technology in mind. Whether it's how we serve our veterans, the VA has failed to serve our veterans for decades, or whether it's how we engage voters in a discussion about what they want to see happen with their government.
It's been about 10 years since you left HP, and during your time as CEO, there were some controversies, mergers, layoffs, offshore jobs. Now that there has been about a decade to have hindsight, would you have done everything the same way?
Well, the short answer is yes. And oh, by the way, you forgot to mention I got fired in a boardroom brawl that took place over a 2-week period because we had board members who were leaking confidential information out of the boardroom. And it's a reminder, I think, that when you lead change, which is what leadership always is, leadership is about disrupting the status quo, not staying within the status quo. But when you disrupt the status quo, you make enemies. It's just human nature. You know, I came to HP at the height of the dot-com boom.
Right, 99?
And I managed it through the depths of the worst technology recession in 25 years. We remember that it was only 2 weeks ago that the NASDAQ recovered to its dot-com boom highs. So those were tough times, and yet, despite those tough times, we doubled the size of the company from about $44 billion to almost $90 billion in revenue. We went from 2% growth at the height of the dot-com boom to 9% growth in the depths of a technology recession. We tripled the rate of innovation to 11 patents a day. We went from lagging behind in every product category and every market segment to leading in every product category and every market segment. And because we went from lagging to leading, we created a lot of jobs in this country and around the world. But of course, when you manage through a very tough recession, there are some tough calls required as well. And of course, everyone else in the technology industry had to make some of those very same tough calls.
Have you seen the website carlyfiorina.org?
No, I haven't, but I've certainly read about it.
You've read about it. Any thoughts?
Well, you know, you can't buy every domain name. You just can't. Maybe we should have tried, but we didn't. And so, you know, people are going to do what they're going to do. But hopefully people will go to carlyforpresident.com instead. And the thing about business that is unlike politics, people have asked me, what's the difference between politics and business? And frequently my answer is politics is a fact-free zone. You know, people just talk. They just talk. The thing is, business is not a fact-free zone. Business has numbers. It has results. So people can say whatever they like, but the facts and the numbers and the results of my time at HP are crystal clear, and they are as I described them.
How connected do you feel to the technology industry today? There are, as you mentioned, the NASDAQ recovering. We are in another boom. Many
of a type, yes.
Of a type. There are a lot of people who say we're in a bubble. You hear that term a lot. If a startup fails, it's, oh, well, here's the beginning of the next big wave of lots of layoffs, Silicon Valley, and it's not sustainable. How connected do you feel to that energy, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I don't think that we're in a similar time right now to the height of 1999. And I think we're in a different time for a whole host of reasons. But recall, of course, that back in 1999, there were some artificial things pushing the dot-com boom. There was Y2K. There was a very aggressive build-out of communications infrastructure in the country that was, in many ways, not sustainable. I do think, however, that we are, in some ways, in a rather frothy time. We have a lot of money going into applications, not as much money going into, say, manufacturing innovation. I think making sure we get that balance right is important to the nation going forward and to the industry going forward. It's also true, I think, that, you know, I remember giving a speech in 2001 in which I said, we're at the beginning of a long 30 or 40-year trend now, where what we're seeing, what we're participating in, is the transformation of everything that is physical and analog today to digital, mobile, virtual, and personal. And I think that is the trend we're still on. So the physical to digital transformation, I mean, we kind of know what that looks like. And certainly we understand what mobile looks like. And I think now where we are is into that revolution towards virtual and personal. And I think that's going to take us for quite a long time. So like any industry, this industry will have its ups and downs. But that digital, mobile, virtual, personal transformation, I think, is a long-term trend that has many years left to run.
Are there any trends that you see now, or even that you're participating in, as far as applications go, that you know in your heart are fads?
Well, look, I feel very much, to be honest with you, the generation gap in technology. You know, there's certain applications that are really popular among teenagers or 20-somethings that, frankly, I just don't get. I just don't get. And I think
Neither do I.
That I think there are, and so some of that may be faddish. I also think that we are trying to learn, as human beings, if I can say this for a moment, I think we're trying to learn the balance between all that we can do and all that we should do. So for example, I'm willing to bet that 85 to 90% of what people spend vast amounts of time doing on their technology every day is pretty superficial and useless.
Oh, have you seen my Instagram account? It's very good.
And so I think that's a place where maybe we need to get a little bit more balance. I would much rather see us, for example, I've talked about for a moment here, technology being a disruptor in terms of how we re-engage citizens in the process of government. You know, how many people vote for American Idol on their cell phones every week? Well, what if, in addition to voting for American Idol or The Voice or whatever the famous and favorite show is, what if, in addition to that, we had citizens, young people in particular, engaging in a conversation, maybe with their president, about what they want to see happen? You know, gee, do you believe that we ought to go to a pay-for-performance system in the federal government so that instead of being able to watch pornography all day long and earn the same pay, pension, and benefits as somebody trying to do a good job, that you might actually be paid on your performance and your contribution? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. I think that'd be an interesting conversation.
Is that something that we can expect from
Yes,
you at the helm?
absolutely, absolutely. You know, I had an interesting conversation on Periscope yesterday with many young people all across this country, and in some from across the world. We had someone from Paris and someone from the Philippines, or I mentioned the Veterans Administration as a bureaucracy that is just failing to serve our veterans. You know, at the VA, they talk about going through a major systems upgrade since 1989. You know, if you're going through a systems upgrade since 1989, you failed. I would take 10, 25-year-old veterans, and I would put them in a room and I would say, tell us how you want to be served. And I picked that age, of course, because they understand all the power, the disruptive power of technology. And I pick that age as well because so many of them are returning from active duty. But they would give us, those 10, 25-year-old veterans, would give us a better blueprint of how to reimagine government serving its citizens than all the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. can ever come up with.
It's interesting that you mentioned Periscope, because I was just up here with the founder of Periscope a couple of hours ago, and we were talking about the issue of being able to live stream something that might be copyrighted. There are some rights issues. This is definitely disruptive technology.
Yep.
And there's definitely that age gap that you mentioned as well, where some people are going to take to this and others are going to go, how is this part of my life?
Yeah.
When you see technology like that that is powerful but has some issues, if you're in charge of the country, how do you fix something like that that is not easily fixable?
Yeah, well, of course, I think let's just start with the fundamental that even a president of the United States can't fix everything, and truthfully can't fix anything alone. Sometimes when presidents think they can fix something alone, they reach way beyond what they should be doing. And so I do think that it's important to have someone in the White House who has a fundamental understanding of technology, a fundamental vision for how technology can be used to make government more responsive, to include citizens more directly, regardless of their circumstances, in the political process. I also think that there are certain things that a government or the president shouldn't be doing. And one of the things I think government shouldn't be doing is trying to regulate in some bureaucracy how innovation progresses in the technology industry. And so I think it's a terrible thing, for example, that the FCC just issued, without anyone commenting on it or anyone voting on it, I think it's a terrible thing that the FCC just issued 400 pages of new regulation over the internet. That's not good. It's not helpful.
What about all the public comments that were taken in?
Well, the public comments came as a result of huge pressure from the public, because people said, wait, we have to be able to look at this. I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence that the FCC took into account many of those public comments.
Really?
Maybe they did, but I don't see
So the
much
fact that
evidence of it.
the volume was there doesn't necessarily mean that
No.
they were taken into consideration at all. I think the
not
public would be very
necessarily.
disappointed to hear that.
But that's the thing. It's an example of a lack of transparency and accountability. Yeah, send in your comments, but what did we do with those comments? Nobody knows. Did we incorporate those comments? Nobody knows. And of course, the truth is that technology is a tool, most fundamentally, to disrupt the status quo, any status quo, but it's most fundamentally a tool to connect people to information. It's the most powerful tool we have to engage citizens in the process of their government, to democratize government, to flatten decision-making cycles, to speed up decision-making cycles, all of which sound like a really good and important thing in a bloated bureaucracy in Washington, D.C.
You've been on lists in the past. You know, if you Google Carly Fiorina, there are all sorts of lists. Most powerful women in technology, in business, the first woman to be in a Fortune 20 company. The reason those lists exist primarily is because it's still very unique to be a powerful woman in not only business but certainly technology, and definitely both. You know, it's count them off on one hand, everybody saying these are the women who are paving the way for the rest of us. What's changed since you were running a company? Do we have the same glass ceiling issues? Do you see things differently? Have they progressed?
Well, I think it's one of those, honestly, it's one of those on the one hand, on the other hand kind of answers, because on the one hand, when I came to Hewlett-Packard, I was the first woman to lead a Fortune 50 company, and today we have a lot of technology companies run by women. Hewlett-Packard is run again by a woman. Meg Whitman, IBM is run by a woman. Yahoo's run by a woman. Facebook, the chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg. So on one, and of course consumer companies, lots of consumer companies. Aerospace companies are run by women today. So on the one hand, that's great progress. On the other hand, I think it's clearly true that the technology industry is not as diverse as it could be. The truth is that women are half the nation. Women are half the nation. And so they represent half the potential of the nation. And if you want to solve problems and make progress, what do you have to do? You have to tap human potential. And so we still have a long way to go. And I would say it's also still true that women, or anyone who's different, honestly, but in this case, you asked about women, I think it's true that women are caricatured differently, criticized differently, scrutinized differently, because we're still different.
Right. Yeah. How is that going to apply to the presidential campaign for you? There's another woman in the mix.
Yes, there is, and that's a great thing. That's a great thing. Obviously, I'm running to beat Hillary Clinton, but I think it's a great thing that there are women on both sides of the aisle who are running for the highest office in the land. You know, I think the truth is that it's important that we wage elections on the basis of the issues that matter to the American people. I've never been a token in my life. I started out as a secretary. On the other hand, the facts are I'm a woman, and so I bring a woman's perspective to the table. And I hope that we can wage this election on the basis of track records and performance and issues and policies and what it means to the people of this country and their possibilities.
You hope that, but do you think we're ready for that?
Well, I don't know. I talk to a lot of people who, men, women, young, middle-aged, and old. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple years in particular talking to voters and would-be voters. And honestly, I have to say that the first thing out of people's mouths is not, oh my gosh, you're a woman. The first thing out of people's mouths tends to be, honestly, oh my gosh, you're not a politician. How refreshing. So that's the difference that people tend to focus on. Ultimately, of course, people get around to, yes, you're a woman. And women, you know, here's some interesting differences. You know, women tend to want to have longer conversations about issues. Men tend to truncate the conversations, as an example. Women tend to get more turned off by a tone of vitriol or sound bites. They don't like the fighting back and forth. So there are some differences for sure.
You hear a lot in the technology industry, the startup industry, that you can learn a lot from failing. And many people who are successful entrepreneurs are successful because they failed and they learned a lot from it. What have you failed at that you feel you can use positively going forward?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think I think it was Thomas Edison who said, there's no such thing as failure, there's only figuring out what not to do next time. And I think actually that's really true. I think one of the most important things about this nation is that we don't write people off when they make a mistake. The truth is, at its core, everyone talks about innovation. Innovation is so great. But one of the reasons that bureaucracies are very bad at innovation is because innovation requires risk-taking. And risk-taking requires mistake-making. It's just the nature of risk-taking. So if you're going to drive change, if you're going to create something new, if you're going to challenge the status quo, if you're going to innovate in any way, it requires risk-taking, which means mistakes will be made. And the goal, of course, is not perfection, because if you're striving for perfection, you don't ever do anything. The goal is not to make the same mistake twice. And so I really think that's how all of us ought to think about our lives. I mean, I've made lots of mistakes in my life, and for me, I hope I don't make the same mistakes over and over and over again.
You mentioned that politicians are good at not telling the truth, or not necessarily telling the truth. Specifically, if you were president, what in tech policy would you want to change immediately? What do you see as unacceptable that is the reality today?
Well, first, as I intimated earlier, I would roll back the 400 pages of regulation that the FCC just published over the internet. It can't possibly work. The FCC is a vast bureaucracy, and think about the non sequitur of having 400 pages of detailed rules and regs over the internet. I mean, it's ridiculous. Secondly, there is a bill that it's wending its way through Congress right now called the Innovation Act. Wow, sounds great. Who isn't for innovation? But when you think about the process of Congress passing a very complicated bill written, frankly, by big companies, what's going to be the consequence of that? It will be harder and harder for small companies to innovate. It will be hard. The consequence of all complicated regulation is that the big get bigger, the powerful get more powerful, and the small and the powerless have a harder time. That's just a fact. And that's why we're now destroying more businesses than we're creating. For the first time in US history, we have more small and new businesses failing because they can't handle the complexity. And so I think one of the very important things that we do in the most innovative industry we have in this country, where we are still leading in the world, is to start to peel back all of this bureaucratic, complicated overlay that government somehow is going to manage the innovation in this industry. It's a complete non sequitur. You don't manage innovation. You let innovation flourish. What government should be doing, instead of rolling out vast, complicated regulation, what government should be doing is investing more in basic platform research. So we all know that the foundation of the internet actually came from DARPANet. That was a place where government was investing heavily in platform research that others would build upon and commercialize later. That's a good role for government. Regulation over innovation is a really bad role for government.
We are at a time, but I have one last question. If you are not president, do you want to be vice president?
And you see, would you ever ask a man running for president that
Yes.
question? Okay, good. You haven't, but maybe I'll have to take you at your word. Look, I'm not running for something else. I'm not running for something else. I'm running because I think I can win this job, and I think I can do this job. And in 2015, I think we need to think differently about what it actually takes to do the job. I think we can't just say somehow the professional political class is all we need. It's a modern invention, actually. You know, for most of our nation's history, we believed in a citizen government, by, for, and of the people. People came out of private life and went into public service for a time and returned back to private life. And somehow we've gotten used to this idea that only the professional political class can run for office. And yet, the things that I mentioned at the outset, an understanding of how the economy works, an understanding of how technology works and how to use it, an understanding of how bureaucracies work and how to disrupt them, an understanding of how the world works and who's in it and what the Chinese are doing in the technology space that we need to be aware of, an understanding of making executive decisions. Those things don't necessarily come from spending an entire lifetime running and winning elected office. They come, in many cases, from a lifetime outside of politics.
Carly Fiorina, everyone, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And best of luck on your campaign.
Thank you.